The Who's Keith Moon will forever be remembered as one of rock's all-time great drummer, but his short life was filled with tragedy, most notably the accidental death of his chauffeur, Neil Boland. On January 4, 1970, Moon, his wife Kim Kerrigan and a group of friends visited the Red Lion in Hatfield as a favor for his neighbor whose son owned the pub. With them was Neil Boland, a close friend of the Who drummer, as well as his driver and bodyguard. Moon, Boland, and their party were standing out and drawing the attention of a nearby group of skinheads. When Moon and their party left the pub, the crowd started to attack them. The group clambered into the Bentley car that they had arrived in, but as they attempted to flee to safety, the drunk, angry skinheads prevented them from leaving, and they started pelting the car with coins. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Boland got out of the car, but a drunk Moon climbed behind the wheel as he tried to drive the others to safety. In the commotion, the drummer hit his driver, who went under the wheels of the car and was killed. Moon pleaded guilty to drink driving, driving without a license, and driving without insurance, but the judge threw out the charges, saying of the rock star's actions, "You had no choice but to act the way you did and no moral culpability is attached to you." Not everyone agreed though, with Rolling Stone magazine publishing an article titled "Keith Moon Gets Off Easy." Despite this, there has been some doubt as to whether Moon was even driving the car, with Boland's daughter believing Kim Kerrigan was actually behind the wheel because of an email she received from a man who claimed to have been part of the skinhead gang that night. According to the 70s groupie Pamela DeBars, Moon was haunted by Boland's death, telling a newspaper, "One night when we were in bed, he broke down and started to cry, calling himself a murderer. He would wake up screaming." Vincent Neil Wharton, best known by his stage name Vince Neil, is an American musician. He is the lead vocalist and occasional rhythm guitarist of the heavy metal band Motley Crue. Despite having an exceptional music career that has lasted for decades, there's one unfortunate incident that has stuck with Neil, when his drunk driving caused the death of a fellow musician's life, Hanoi Rocks drummer Nicholas Razzle Dingley. On December 8, 1984, Neil was having a party with some friends of Hanoi Rocks at his home near Redondo Beach, a party he wrote in his autobiography that had lasted for days. During the third day, despite the seemingly never-dwindling pile of coke, they ran out of alcohol. So, around dusk, Dingley and Neil decided to go for a booze run to the liquor store located just 4 blocks away. "I could have walked there," Neil said, "but I'd been partying for 3 straight days, and walking there was out of the question. Too much reality to deal with, if you know what I mean," Neil wrote. He had just bought a new car, a bright red vintage '72 Ford de Tomaso Pantera, which he was excited to drive. He claimed he didn't see a problem with his state of mind. "We'd drive the 4 blocks to the store, get some supplies, be back home in a flash," he wrote. "I'd been driving drunk for about as long as I'd been driving. It had never been a problem before. The coke kind of evened things out." So he and Dingley got into the car and they made it to the liquor store safely, where they bought hundreds of dollars worth of alcohol before heading back to Neil's house. Because the car didn't have a backseat, Razzle was holding all the alcohol in his lap. "We were driving along, chatting about this and that. 2 long-haired guys out on a booze run, me in my customary Hawaiian shirt and shorts, Razzle in his high tops, leather jeans and frilly shirt," he wrote. "It was dark out by then," Neil explained in his book, and as he rounded a curve leading to a hill, he downshifted. Neil said his car lost its grip on the asphalt, and he began sliding sideways while another car began drifting into the oncoming lane. "The next thing I knew, a pair of headlights appeared at the crest of the hill and was bearing down on us, a white Volkswagen driven by an 18-year-old girl. That car struck the passenger side of Neil's car, where Dingley was sitting with all the booze. The impact of the crash threw him into Neil's lap. I was holding him," he wrote. "There were broken booze bottles everywhere. Later I'd hear the cops saying something about how bad we reeked. Well, of course we reeked." Razzle had been holding a party's worth of liquor in his lap. Dingley died of severe head injuries at a hospital later that evening. The police would later tell Neil that he had been doing 65 miles per hour in a 25. Neil's blood alcohol level was 0.17, which was well above the limit. Dingley wasn't the only victim. The occupants of the other car, Lisa Hogan and Daniel Smithers, were seriously injured and suffered brain damage. 2 years after the crash, Neil was sentenced to 30 days in jail, 200 hours of community service, and to pay $2.6 million in restitution to the victims of the crash. He only served 15 days of his 30-day sentence. David Randall Blythe, born on February 21, 1971. He is an American vocalist, best known as the lead singer and lyricist of the heavy metal band Lamb of God. Lamb of God has been one of the mainstays of the heavy metal genre for 2 decades. Over 9 albums, 2 Grammy nominations, and 1 gold record, the band has earned quite a following, both in the US and internationally. They've toured all over the world, and their live shows are frequently high-energy, intense affairs, so much so one accidentally led to a fan's death. In 2012, the band flew to Czechia for a show in Prague. Moments after arriving at the airport, frontman Randy Blythe was arrested by authorities, though he had no idea why. In a 2010 show, the previous time the band visited Prague, a fan had climbed on stage, and Blythe had shoved him back into the crowd. The same fan climbed on for a second time, and Blythe escorted him off the stage. Then, Daniel Nosek, a 19-year-old fan, also climbed on the stage. Blythe confused Nosek for the fan he had already removed from the stage twice, and gave him a hard push, assuming the crowd would catch him. However, they did not, and Nosek died from injuries sustained in the fall. The band had no idea it even happened, until they had returned, and Blythe was then charged with manslaughter. According to TV Nova, Blythe stated that he had not been aware of Nosek's death, and had expressed his remorse. A police spokesperson stated on June 29, 2012, that the police had formally charged Blythe under Section 146 of the Czech Criminal Code, which contains intentional infliction of bodily harm, resulting in death. He faced 5 to 10 years of imprisonment if found guilty. After several delays, Blythe went to trial, but was eventually found not criminally liable. Blythe did publicly show remorse for the accident, and even talked to Nosek's family privately, saying they were very kind to him. On March 5, 2013, the court delivered a verdict, according to which Blythe was not criminally liable for Nosek's death, even though he had the moral responsibility for it. Consequently, the court dismissed the damages claim and ordered the return of Blythe's bail. The court held that it was proven that Blythe had thrown Nosek off the stage. However, Blythe, due to his nearsightedness, could have mistaken Nosek for the other fan who had repeatedly gotten over the guardrail. According to the court, the largest part of the blame lies with the promoters and security members. Louis Cachet, born Christian Vikernes, on the 11th of February 1973, better known as Varg Vikernes. The early black metal scene in Norway was full of profoundly messed up young people. But Varg Vikernes, the self-styled Count Grishnek, took the cake. After rising to prominence in the black metal scene with his atmospheric solo project, Burzum, Vikernes' musical profile rose when he joined the band Mayhem, black metal's leading voice in the early 90s. Described as the most notorious metal musician of all time, Vikernes remains controversial for his crimes as well as his political and religious views. He promoted views which combined Otanism and esoteric Nazism, and openly embraced Nazism during the mid-late 1990s. On the 6th of June 1992, the Fantoft Stave Church in Norway, dating from the 12th century and considered architecturally significant, was burned to the ground by arson. The cover of Burzum's EP, Ashes, is a photograph of the destroyed church. By January 1993, arson attacks had occurred on at least 7 other major stave churches, including one on Christmas Eve of 1992. Vikernes was found guilty of several of these cases. He was also charged with the arson of Fantoft Stave Church, although the jurors found him not guilty. The judges called this an error, but did not overthrow the whole case. At the time, media outlets reported that Vikernes was associated with theistic Satanism. In later interviews, Vikernes, while not accepting responsibility for the arsons, said that they were not satanic, but instead revenge for the Christian desecration of Viking graves and temples. According to Vikernes, the arsons were on the anniversary of the Lindisfarne Viking raid. Vikernes claimed that all the burnings, except for the one at Stavanger, were done by one person. After a few years of what can be seen as a superficial friendship and music partnership, the tension between Vikernes and bandmate Euronymous grew to an obvious issue. Those close to the Norwegian black metal scene agreed that the murder had ultimately been the result of a power struggle between the two. Before the murder of Arseth, there had been rumors that Euronymous was planning to torture and murder Varg for his disruptive, compulsive need for attention that had reached to the point of burning churches. Euronymous, unlike Vikernes, had begun shifting his attention to the business aspect of music, and had become irritated with Vikernes' focus on obtaining the edgy and scary imagery of Satanism, death, and pyromania, all of which Varg had been very aware of, regularly identifying Euronymous as a poser, not true to the scene. On August 10, 1993, Norwegian black metal singer Øystein Euronymous Arseth was found stabbed to death 23 times in the confines of his apartment. In May 1994, after months of persistent investigations by the Oslo Police Department, they were able to arrest and charge Varg Vikernes with first-degree murder. Vikernes said the killing was self-defense. He was convicted of first-degree murder, church arson, and possession of explosives. Vikernes unsuccessfully argued for the charge to be reduced to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum penalty under Norwegian law. In March 2009, Vikernes was paroled. He had then served nearly 15 years of his 21-year sentence. Bertrand Cantat, born the 5th of March 1964, is a French songwriter, singer, and musician. Known for being the former frontman of the rock band Noir Désir. At the height of Noir Désir's success in the 1990s, he was one of the most prominent figures of French music. In 2003, following an argument related to infidelity, Bertrand Cantat repeatedly assaulted his girlfriend Marie Trintignant in a hotel room in Vilnius, Lithuania, then tucked her unconscious body into bed. She died several days later in hospital due to brain swelling. At his 2004 trial, prosecutors said he had hit her 19 times, causing irreversible brain damage. He was said to have flown into a jealous rage after she received an affectionate text message from her former husband. Notably, Cantat was also admitted to the same hospital, suffering from a lethal mix of alcohol and sedatives, and required an immediate gastric lavage. The death of Marie caused considerable emotion in France. Nadine Trintignant, Marie's mother, actively sought a heavy sentence. Cantat's friends claimed he had been out of his mind and had not intended to cause harm. On the 29th of March 2004, Cantat was sentenced by Vilnius Regional Court to 8 years in prison for murder, committed with indirect intent. It was acknowledged by the court that he didn't want to kill the victim, but foresaw her death as a probable consequence of his acts and was indifferent with regard to such a consequence. The verdict was at first appealed by Marie's family, who wanted a tougher sentence. Bertrand Cantat wanted the higher court to reclassify his crime as a manslaughter and lessen his sentence, but both parties ultimately decided to cancel their appeals, which rendered the first 8 years' judgment final. While in Lukacs prison of Vilnius, Cantat performed on the 11th of August 2004 a concert for prisoners and the prison's administration. At the request of his lawyers, Cantat was moved from a Lithuanian prison to a prison near Muret, France on the 28th of September 2004. Cantat was released on parole on the 16th of October 2007 after serving half of his sentence. James Beck Gordon is an American musician, songwriter, and convicted felon. Gordon was a popular session drummer in the late 1960s and 1970s, and was the drummer in the blues rock supergroup Derek and the Dominoes, and he co-wrote the classic song Layla. Gordon developed schizophrenia and began to hear voices, including his mother's, which compelled him to starve himself and prevented him from sleeping, relaxing, or playing the drums. His physicians misdiagnosed the problems and instead treated him for alcohol abuse. While on tour with Joe Cocker in the early 1970s, Gordon reportedly punched his then-girlfriend Rita Coolidge in a hotel hallway, thereby ending their relationship. Finally, on June 3, 1983, the voices in the drummer's head had completely taken over his soul, leading him to do an unthinkable act. When he got to her place, she wasn't there yet, so he returned home and waited patiently. At around 11:30 p.m., he returned. The lights in the house were on, and when he knocked on the door, he could hear his mom pacing across the floor in her slippers. Jim Gordon glimpsed at the 72-year-old gray-haired woman standing in front of him. "Jim," his mom cried out, right before he hit her. As she cried and yelled out in fear, the crazed drummer pounded her down with the hammer. When she collapsed to the floor, he grabbed his knife and plunged it into her chest 3 times. Then, he left it there, jammed into her chest. James wasn't going to get away with this, and he would quickly find himself in cuffs and standing trial for murder. During his trial in Los Angeles, his defense argued insanity. However, one California law made it nearly impossible to prove he was legally insane. On July 10, 1984, Gordon was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. He was first eligible for parole in 1991, but parole has been denied several times as he has never attended a parole hearing. In 2014, he declined to attend his hearing and was denied parole until at least 28. A Los Angeles deputy district attorney stated at the hearing that he was still seriously psychologically incapacitated and a danger when he is not taking his medication. In November 2017, Gordon was re-diagnosed with schizophrenia. On March 7, 2018, Gordon was again denied parole for the 10th time and was tentatively scheduled to become eligible again in March 2021. As of 2023, he was serving his sentence at the California Medical Facility, a medical and psychiatric prison in Vacaville, California.